I had always known Bella was the center of attention. She had this way about her, this natural charisma that could light up a room. It wasn't just her looks, though she was undeniably beautiful, but her energy. She moved with a grace that drew eyes. She laughed with a sound that felt like music. And when she spoke, people listened. I couldn't help but admire that about her. When we first met, I was drawn to that vivacity. I, on the other hand, was more reserved. Quiet. Content in the background. She seemed like the perfect balance to my introversion. Where I lacked social ease, she filled the space with her charm. At first it was exciting. She took me out of my shell, encouraged me to step outside my comfort zone. I thought it was all part of what made our relationship work. We complemented each other. But slowly over time things began to shift. I noticed it in the little things at first. Bella was always affectionate with others, touching their arms, leaning in too closely, laughing with them in a way that seemed more intimate than necessary. I brushed it off initially, telling myself I was being paranoid. After all, Bella was just friendly. She had always been that way. But then it started to bother me more. At social events, she would dance with my friends, pressing her body against theirs in ways that made me uncomfortable. She'd whisper in their ears, share jokes with them that she wouldn't share with me. It wasn't just innocent flirting. It felt deliberate, like a way of proving her allure to the room. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to seem insecure. Bella had always told me I was lucky to have such a beautiful wife. She often reminded me that she was the envy of every man, and that should make me proud. But it didn't make me feel proud. It made me feel small. Like I was living in her shadow. There were nights when I would lay in bed next to her, trying to ignore the weight of her presence next to me. She would be laughing about something from earlier in the day, another joke or touch she'd shared with someone else, and I would lie there, wondering if I still had any place in her world. I wanted to talk to her, to tell her how I felt, but every time I tried, she would dismiss me. "Aaron, you're overthinking it," she'd say with that carefree smile. "You should be proud of me. I'm just doing what I've always done." And yet, with every word she said, every laugh she shared with someone else, I began to feel more invisible, more irrelevant. One night, we attended a party hosted by one of my old college friends. Bella was radiant, of course. She wore a deep red dress that clung to her in all the right places, and as soon as we walked in, I could see everyone's eyes follow her. I was proud of her at first. But then, as the night wore on, I started to feel that familiar unease. She was laughing with Mark, my best friend from work. She was leaning into him, her hand on his shoulder, her face so close to his as they spoke. She whispered something in his ear and they both laughed, her fingers grazing his neck in a way that made my stomach churn. I excused myself and went outside to the balcony for some air. I tried to breathe, tried to shake off the feeling of discomfort gnawing at my chest. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized something I hadn't been able to admit to myself. I was losing her. She was slipping away piece by piece into a world where I had no place. And the worst part was she didn't even seem to care. When I finally went back inside, Bella was still with Mark. She didn't even notice when I returned, too wrapped up in their conversation. It was as though I didn't exist in that moment. And that's when it hit me, the realization I had been avoiding for months. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't something we could talk through. She wasn't just being friendly, she was craving attention from everyone but me. And no matter how hard I tried, I would never be able to give her what she needed. That night, as we drove home in silence, I knew things couldn't continue like this. She was distant, her mind clearly elsewhere, and I was left in the passenger seat, feeling more alone than I ever had before. When we got home, Bella went straight to the bedroom, not bothering to ask how I was feeling. I sat on the couch, my thoughts racing. I wanted to tell her everything, how her behavior was making me feel, how I was drowning in a sea of insecurities, how I didn't know who I was anymore in this relationship. But I didn't. She was already dismissive when I tried to speak up in the past. I knew what she would say, "You're just being insecure. You should be proud of me. You're lucky to have someone like me." She was right in a way. I was lucky to have her, if only I had been able to keep her. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, I realized that I couldn't keep living this way. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. Something had to change, and I had no idea how I was going to fix it or even if it could be fixed. The weight of that realization settled heavily on my chest. This wasn't just about her flirting anymore. This was about the fact that we were no longer living the same life. She had moved on without even noticing I was still there. And I was starting to wonder if I had anything left to give. I didn't know it yet, but that night would mark the beginning of the end for us. I just hadn't found the courage to face it. Not yet. The days after that night were a blur of silence and routine. Bella and I barely spoke except for the occasional exchange about dinner or some trivial detail that didn't matter. I kept my distance, retreating further into myself as I watched her go through the motions of her life, unfazed, unbothered. She was always busy with something, whether it was a brunch with friends, a shopping trip, or another party she was hosting. I couldn't even remember the last time we had done something together, just the two of us. It was in the quiet of the evenings, after all the noise of her life had died down, that I would truly feel the emptiness. She would curl up on the couch, scrolling through her phone, responding to texts and social media comments, oblivious to the fact that I was sitting right next to her. When I would glance over, I would see the familiar flirty smile on her face as she typed messages to others, perhaps someone she was already planning to meet. I had become so used to the loneliness that I no longer questioned it. But deep down I knew it wasn't healthy. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I had convinced myself that maybe I was just being too sensitive. Maybe I wasn't the type of man who could handle someone as lively as Bella. But that nagging voice in my head kept telling me I was worth more than this. That I deserved more than the shadows of a relationship. And then one afternoon everything changed. It happened at the grocery store, of all places. Bella and I had gone out to pick up a few things for dinner, a rare joint errand. She was pushing the cart ahead of me, scanning the shelves for something, her phone glued to her hand as usual. I was trying to catch up, but I kept getting distracted by my thoughts, by the growing sense of dread in my chest. Something felt off. And then I saw it. Bella was standing near the checkout when I noticed a man approach her. I didn't recognize him, but the way he smiled at her, the way she lit up when he spoke, it wasn't casual. They spoke for a few moments, their conversation light and easy, but something about the way they stood so close made my stomach twist. Bella was laughing, her hand touching his arm as she gestured to something in the cart. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. The way she was looking at him, the way they shared that intimate moment, it was clear this wasn't just a friendly encounter. It was something more. For a second I froze. A cold wave of realization hit me and I couldn't breathe. I didn't even know this man, but it didn't matter. I knew what I was seeing and it was enough. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I wasn't even a priority. Bella's world had shifted and I wasn't a part of it. I stood there in the aisle, paralyzed by the pain in my chest, unable to move, unable to speak. I wanted to go up to her to demand answers, but what would I say? What could I say that hadn't already been said in 100 small ways? How could I confront her when I had already become a shadow of the person I once was? The worst part was that Bella didn't even seem to notice me standing there. She didn't glance over, didn't check to see if I was okay. She was lost in the moment with him. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I just stood there, watching as she laughed with him, oblivious to the destruction she was causing in my heart. Eventually, they parted ways, and Bella turned to head towards the checkout, not once glancing in my direction. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't pretend. I couldn't keep living in this fractured version of a marriage. When we got home, I didn't say anything. I couldn't bring myself to. Bella didn't even ask about the groceries. She went straight to the kitchen, humming to herself as she put away the items, as though nothing had happened. As though nothing had changed. That night, as we lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I had tried to tell myself that things would get better, that I could handle her need for attention, but that was a lie. I had tried to convince myself that I could make her see me, that she would eventually come back to me, but deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I had spent too many months drowning in my own insecurities, hoping she would change, hoping she would see me. But now I realized that it wasn't about her changing. It was about me. It was about me finding the courage to let go. I turned onto my side away from her, and lay there in the dark, feeling the weight of the decision that I had been avoiding for so long. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it was so clearly falling apart. I was losing myself and I didn't know how to get back. Bella wasn't going to change. I had to. I got up quietly in the middle of the night, gathered my things and packed a bag. I didn't want to confront her. I didn't want to fight. I was done. I didn't even leave a note. I knew she wouldn't care enough to read it, let alone understand it. I left the house, closing the door behind me without a sound. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a small flicker of relief. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I couldn't keep living in that broken marriage. I was going to find my way back to myself, even if it meant walking away from everything I once thought I wanted. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least it was mine to walk alone. The night air was cool as I stepped out of the house, the weight of the door closing behind me signaling the end of something I had spent years holding on to. I didn't have a destination in mind, just a need to leave, to get as far away from that house as I could. I wasn't even sure where I was going, but I couldn't stay there, not with everything falling apart around me. I drove aimlessly at first, the roads empty and quiet as the city slept. My mind raced with thoughts of Bella, of the years we had spent together. I remembered when we first got married how I used to feel like the luckiest man in the world. Bella had been everything to me, beautiful, charismatic, full of life. She had drawn me out of my shell, made me feel like I could be someone more than just the quiet, introspective guy I had always been. I thought that would be enough, that we could make it work, but it wasn't. And now, everything that I had built my life around was slipping through my fingers. I drove for hours, finally finding myself outside of Matthew's house. Matthew had always been there for me, the one person I could rely on when everything else fell apart. We had been friends since college, and when Bella and I started drifting apart, I had leaned on him more than I had ever realized. I parked my car in the driveway, took a deep breath, and walked up to the door. I didn't even knock. I just opened it and let myself in, knowing that Matthew would be up, probably working or reading like always. "Hey," I said quietly as I stepped into his living room. He looked up from the book he was reading, surprised but not shocked to see me. "Aaron? What's going on, man?" He stood up, closing the book and walking over. I didn't even realize it at the time, but I had tears in my eyes. I wiped them away quickly, trying to maintain some semblance of control. I left," I said simply. Matthew's face softened. He didn't need to ask questions. He knew. "Come in, sit down," he said, guiding me to the couch. "Want to talk about it?" I nodded, sitting down, my mind still reeling from everything that had happened. The weight of what I'd done, of what had been happening for months, began to hit me all at once. It wasn't just the confrontation with Bella at the grocery store that had broken me, it was everything. The loneliness, the feeling of being invisible, the subtle erosion of something I had once believed in. "I just couldn't do it anymore, Matt," I said, my voice tight. I couldn't keep pretending that I was okay with it. The way she's always looking for attention from everyone but me. The way she makes me feel like I don't matter. Matthew sat down next to me, nodding as he listened. He didn't offer any quick solutions or try to fix things, which was exactly what I needed. He knew I wasn't asking for advice. I just needed to say it out loud. "Do you think you'll go back?" he asked after a long pause. I shook my head. "No, I don't think I can. I don't even know who I am in that relationship anymore. I've been losing myself for so long, I don't even recognize the guy who's been living there. I don't know what's left for me, but I can't stay. I need to find a way to be me again." Matthew was quiet for a long time, his expression thoughtful. Finally he spoke again. "You know you're welcome here, right? You don't have to figure everything out right away. Just take some time." I didn't say anything, just nodded. The words were a comfort, though I knew it wasn't a solution. I had left the house, but I had not yet left the pain of that relationship behind. I wasn't sure I could. The next few days were a blur. Matthew kept me busy, giving me projects to work on, small jobs for his friends or things around the house that needed fixing. It kept my mind from wandering too much, but the loneliness still crept in. I found myself thinking about Bella, wondering what she was doing, wondering if she even noticed I was gone. Did she miss me? Or was she already moving on to someone else? I didn't have answers, and I wasn't sure I wanted them. I spent hours pacing around Matthew's house, feeling trapped by my own thoughts. I had spent so much of my life with Bella, so much of my identity was wrapped up in her, that I wasn't sure how to exist without her. I had always been her husband, the quiet one, the one who needed her to shine. Now I had to figure out who I was without her. And that was scarier than anything. After a few days, I decided to start working again. I reached out to a few contacts I had in architecture, taking on a small freelance project to keep myself occupied. It wasn't much, but it felt good to have something that was just mine, something I could control. Slowly, the work began to fill the space that had once been filled with thoughts of Bella. Matthew was a steady presence in my life, reminding me that there was more to me than what Bella had made me feel. We talked about the old days, our college years, the dreams we had shared, the things we had hoped for. Slowly, I began to feel something like peace. But I knew it wasn't over. It wasn't just about getting away from Bella, it was about rediscovering who I was, and that journey had only just begun. But no matter how much time passed, one thought always lingered: Bella's absence. How she had left a hole in my life, a hole that I wasn't sure I could ever fill. As I worked, and as I tried to piece my life back together, I began to realize something. I was starting to find myself again. I didn't have all the answers, but I was beginning to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It had been weeks since I left, and slowly I began to adjust. It wasn't easy, living with Matthew and trying to carve out a new version of my life. but it was a start. The weight of my past with Bella still hung over me, like a shadow I couldn't outrun, but I was beginning to realize something. I didn't need to outrun it. I needed to face it. The architecture project I had started to work on was finally taking shape. I spent long hours sketching designs, meeting with clients, and feeling a sense of accomplishment that I hadn't felt in years. It felt good to build something from scratch, to see the results of my hard work come to life. I could feel the old Aaron, the Aaron who had been passionate about his career, driven by purpose and proud of his accomplishments, returning. Matthew was a steady presence, a reminder that I wasn't alone. We had spent more time together in the past month than we had in years. He could see the change in me, though he never said it outright. I didn't need him to say anything. I could feel it in the way I carried myself now. I was learning to take ownership of my life again. But even as I settled into this new rhythm, there were still moments when Bella's absence hit me like a wave. I would be walking through the city, lost in thought, and I would hear a familiar laugh or a woman's voice that sounded like hers. For a brief second, my heart would race and I would turn, expecting to see her there, smiling, lighting up the world as she always did. But she was never there. I wasn't sure if I missed her or the idea of her, but there was a distinct emptiness in those moments, a longing for something I knew I could never have again. I had been so consumed by our relationship for so long that it was hard to imagine a life without it. I kept wondering if she was okay, if she had even noticed my absence, if she was still the woman I had fallen in love with. But I couldn't afford to dwell on her anymore. I couldn't afford to wait for her to change, for her to realize what she had lost. I had already lost enough of myself in that marriage. It was time to focus on me, to rebuild what had been shattered, even if that meant letting go completely. Then came the phone call. It was late on a Thursday evening when my phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at it, not expecting anything urgent. But when I saw her name on the screen, my heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from Bella since the night I left. No texts, no calls. She hadn't even tried to find me. So, to see her name on my phone was a shock. I stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of what to do. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready to face her again, to open up those old wounds. But I couldn't ignore her call. I pressed the green button, my fingers trembling slightly. Aaron, Bella's voice came through the phone, soft and tentative. I hadn't heard her sound like that in months. I need to talk to you. My heart tightened in my chest. What is it, Bella? There was a long pause on the other end, and when she spoke again, her voice was different, fragile, almost as if she was trying to hold back tears. I've been thinking about everything. About us. About what happened. I didn't respond immediately. My mind was racing. I hadn't expected this. I had spent so much time trying to move on, to find myself again, that I hadn't anticipated her reaching out. I wasn't sure what to say, or if I even wanted to hear what she had to say. But I knew that this moment, this conversation, was inevitable. Why now? I finally asked, my voice steady despite the chaos inside. Why didn't you reach out sooner? I didn't know how, she admitted. I didn't want to admit that I'd lost you. That I was the one who pushed you away. I thought you'd always be there, that I could keep doing what I wanted and you'd just accept it. I closed my eyes, taking in the words. There was a part of me that wanted to believe her, to hear the apology, to feel like maybe this was the moment everything could be fixed. But I couldn't forget the months of neglect, the constant disregard for my feelings. It wasn't just her flirting or her need for attention. It was the way she had made me feel invisible, like I didn't matter. I don't know what to say, Bella, I finally said. You hurt me. And I don't think I can go back to that place, to the person I was when I was with you. I understand, she said quickly, almost as though she had anticipated my response. I don't expect things to go back to how they were. But I need you to know that I regret how things ended. I've been through a lot too. I've realized a lot about myself. And I want to make amends even if we're never the same again. There was silence between us as I processed her words. For a long time, I had wanted to hear her acknowledge the damage she had done. I wanted her to recognize how much I had suffered, how much I had given of myself. But hearing her say it now, in the quiet of my new life, I realized it wasn't enough. Her apology, though genuine, wouldn't undo the past. Bella, I said, my voice softer now, I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were. But I've changed. I've learned things about myself that I didn't even know existed. I'm not that guy anymore. And I don't think you're the same person either. She was silent for a moment, as if weighing my words. I know, she whispered finally. I don't expect us to go back. But maybe we can find a way to move forward, separately. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. For everything. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I held it together. I appreciate that. But I need to go on with my life, Bella. I'm done with the past. The line went quiet and I knew the conversation was over. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I just felt finished. It was a strange sense of finality, of closure. Bella's apology didn't erase the pain, but it did give me something I hadn't had in a long time: peace. As I hung up the phone, I leaned back against the couch, taking a deep breath. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew this. I was finally ready to face it. I wasn't defined by my past anymore. I wasn't defined by Bella or by the relationship we had. I was Aaron again, and that was enough. I stood up, my heart feeling lighter than it had in years. The world outside was waiting, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to meet it. The days that followed Bella's call were both quiet and loud in their own way. There was a new sense of calm in my life, but it wasn't the kind of peace that came from complete contentment. It was the kind of peace that grew from knowing you had made a difficult decision and were finally starting to live with the consequences. Matthew noticed the change in me right away. He hadn't asked what had happened between Bella and me after I hung up the phone, but I could tell he was waiting. When he finally brought it up, we were sitting on his porch late one evening, drinking beers and talking about everything and nothing. "You seem lighter," Matthew said, squinting as he took a sip from his bottle. I looked at him and smiled. "I guess I am." "You talked to her, huh?" I nodded. "Yeah. It was exactly what I needed. I think it gave me closure in a way. But at the same time, I'm not sure what I was expecting. I think I just needed to hear her say it. Hear her say that she regretted how everything went down. Did you get what you wanted?" I thought about that for a moment. Not exactly. But I realized something important. I don't need her to fix anything. I don't need her to validate me or make me feel better. It's on me now. Matthew didn't respond right away. He just stared at the horizon, the streetlights casting long shadows over the quiet neighborhood. I knew he understood. He had been there for me through every part of this, every moment of confusion, frustration, and eventual clarity. "I'm glad you're doing okay," he said finally, his voice low. "I think you're on the right track. But remember, man, healing isn't a straight line. You're gonna have good days and bad days, and that's okay." I nodded, appreciating his words. The idea of healing had been a foreign concept to me for a while. I didn't know what it would look like or when it would arrive. But the more time passed, the more I understood that it wasn't something I could force. It wasn't something that came with an apology or an explanation. It came with time, with space, and with a lot of hard work on myself. The next few weeks were spent rebuilding, not just my career but my life. I threw myself into my work even more, determined to build something solid and lasting. The small architecture project I had started with Matthew's help turned into something bigger, and before I knew it, I had a handful of new clients. They didn't know the man I had been or the man I was becoming. They only saw the work, and I was proud of that. The satisfaction of seeing my designs take shape, seeing my efforts come to life, was something I had craved for so long. There were nights when I would come home from a meeting or an early morning site visit, and I would realize how far I had come. My apartment, small and humble as it was, began to feel like home. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The old furniture, the mismatched decor, it all held a sense of freedom that I hadn't known in years. But there were still moments of quiet loneliness, of longing for something that didn't exist anymore. I would catch myself after a long day, waiting for Bella to come through the door with that infectious smile, or hearing the sound of her laughter from the other room. For a moment I would forget. And then, just as quickly, I would remember. The reality of our breakup would hit me all over again. It wasn't just her presence I missed. It was the idea of her, the woman I thought I knew, the life we had planned together. But I had come to realize that we had been living in a world of illusions, both of us pretending that we were happy, pretending that the cracks in our relationship could be patched over with more attention, more affection, more success. The truth was that we had never really understood each other in the ways we thought we did. Our needs were different, and no amount of love could bridge that gap. One evening while I was working late at my desk, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from Matthew. Asterisk, "Hey man, there's someone here to see you." Asterisk. I raised an eyebrow and quickly texted back. "Who?" His reply was simple. Asterisk, "You'll see." Asterisk. I didn't know what to make of it. I hadn't seen or heard from Bella since our phone call, and I had no reason to expect her to show up at my door. I stood up, walked to the living room, and opened the door. Standing there, in the dim hallway light, was a familiar figure. "Bella?" I said, my voice low with surprise. She was standing in the doorway, looking nervous, unsure of what to say next. Her eyes were tired, her hair slightly messier than usual. But something in her expression caught me off guard. She didn't look like the woman I had known before. She didn't look like the woman who had taken my feelings for granted. She looked human, vulnerable, real. I didn't know where else to go, she said, her voice soft. I didn't want to just call again. I wanted to see you, to apologize in person. I didn't know what to say. There were a million things I could have said, a million emotions I could have expressed. But all I could do was nod, stepping aside to let her in. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step forward. A step toward acknowledging that the past didn't have to define us, that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to move forward. She sat down on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt thick, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had both changed, who had both grown in ways that had nothing to do with each other. Finally, Bella spoke. Aaron, I know I hurt you, she said, her voice steady, but there was a tremor in it that betrayed her. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to say that I'm sorry. For everything. I took a deep breath, looking at her. I had expected this moment, but I hadn't prepared for how it would feel. The words weren't new. But her presence, her vulnerability, it was something different. I know you are, I replied quietly. And I know I've changed. I've learned to let go of the things that hurt me. But I'm not the same person I was when I left. I'm finding myself again. Bella nodded slowly, her eyes filled with understanding. She didn't argue, didn't try to convince me otherwise. She just sat there, accepting that this moment wasn't about fixing the past, it was about accepting it. And as I sat there, in the quiet of that room, I realized something. Bella and I weren't the people we once were, and maybe that was okay. Maybe this was the beginning of something new, not with each other but with ourselves. We were both learning to live with the choices we had made, and that was enough for now. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. The weeks after Bella's visit were a strange mix of reflection and anticipation. The time we spent together that night wasn't about rekindling anything, it was about closure, acceptance, and understanding that we had both changed. The man I had been when I left her was gone, and so was the woman she had been when we first met. We both had our journeys to walk, and they no longer intertwined. I didn't see Bella much after that night. She would occasionally text or call, but the conversations were brief, often about mundane things, no longer filled with the emotional weight of our past. There was a quiet understanding between us that our relationship, as it had once been, was over. We were two people who had shared a life but no longer shared a future. I threw myself into my work even more, finding comfort in the steady rhythm of deadlines, meetings, and design work. The consultancy was growing, and I was slowly but surely gaining a reputation in the field. The work I had done for friends like Matthew turned into larger projects, and before I knew it, I was working with clients I had admired from a distance. It was empowering. Each completed project, each new design felt like another step forward, not just in my career but in my life. There were moments, of course, when I felt the pull of the past. There were days when I would pass places Bella and I used to go, cafes we used to frequent, parks where we would sit for hours talking about our future. I'd see couples walking hand in hand, and for a fleeting second, I would wish for the simplicity of those times. But then, I'd remember how those moments had been layered with doubt, how the person I had been had lost himself in her world. I remembered how much I had given up for someone who couldn't truly see me. And slowly as time passed, those feelings faded. They didn't vanish overnight, but the sharpness of the pain softened, and with it came a quiet sense of peace. One morning, about 6 months after Bella's visit, I found myself sitting in my new office, a modest space still a bit cluttered but mine. I had decorated it with a few personal touches, an old bookshelf filled with architecture books, a framed photo from a trip I had taken to Paris years ago, a set of plants I'd started taking care of. It was a place I could breathe, a place that felt like my own. That morning, I was meeting with a new client, someone I had only recently connected with through Matthew. As I waited for the client to arrive, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come. I wasn't the man who had left Bella in the dead of night, uncertain and broken. I was a man who had learned to stand on his own, who had built a life from the ground up. Just as I was lost in these thoughts, there was a knock at the door. I stood up, smoothing my shirt as I prepared for the meeting. "Come in," I called out. The door opened, and to my surprise, it wasn't my client. It was someone else. It was Bella. I froze, my heart suddenly hammering in my chest. She looked different, calmer, more composed, but still with that unmistakable grace that had always drawn me to her. Her hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, and she wore a simple dress that was both elegant and understated. She looked like the woman I had once loved, but there was something different in her eyes, something more introspective, more aware. "Hi, Aaron," she said softly, stepping into the room. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge of uncertainty to it. I couldn't speak at first. I hadn't expected this, hadn't expected her to show up at my office, of all places. My first instinct was to stand up and walk away, but I stayed rooted to the spot, unsure of what to do. "Bella," I said finally, trying to keep my voice steady. "What are you doing here?" "I know this is unexpected," she said, glancing at the chair across from me. I've been thinking about you a lot. About us. About everything." I didn't know what to say. A part of me wanted to tell her to leave, that I wasn't ready for this, that we had both moved on. But there was another part of me, a part one hadn't fully acknowledged until that moment, that wanted to hear her out. I had worked so hard to let go, to accept that we were no longer a part of each other's lives. But there was something about seeing her now, something that made me wonder if this was the final chapter in our story or just another new beginning. I gestured to the chair. "Sit down, Bella," I said, my voice softer now. "What's going on?" She hesitated for a moment, then sat down slowly. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in a long while, I saw vulnerability in her gaze. "I wanted to tell you that I've been working on myself," she said quietly. "I've been going to therapy, trying to figure out who I am without all the distractions. I've been making changes, real ones. I don't expect you to believe me or even forgive me, but I needed to tell you that I've been trying. I've been trying to be a better version of myself." I sat there, absorbing her words. It was what I had always wanted to hear from her, the acknowledgement that she had learned, that she had grown. But even as she spoke, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I didn't feel the rush of old emotions that I thought might resurface. There was no anger, no bitterness. There was just acceptance. "I'm glad you're making changes, Bella," I said, my voice steady. "I think we both needed to. But you and we've already done our work. Our lives are different now. I'm not who I was when we first met, and you're not who you were either. And that's okay. It's just, we're not meant to be together anymore." Bella's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she nodded slowly. "I understand. I don't want to hold on to something that isn't there anymore. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. And that I've changed." I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past lift a little more. "I'm sorry too," I said quietly. "For the things I didn't say, for the things I couldn't fix. But I'm proud of the man I'm becoming. And I hope you can be proud of yourself too." We sat in silence for a few moments, both of us processing the weight of everything we had been through. And for the first time I realized that this was it. There was no more unfinished business between us. There was no need for anger or resentment. We had both learned, we had both grown. And now it was time to move forward. Bella stood up, wiping her eyes. "Thank you, Aaron. For everything. I'll always remember the good times, but I know now that we were meant to go our separate ways." I nodded. "Take care, Bella. I hope you find what you're looking for." She gave me a soft smile one last time, and then she left. And just like that, I was alone again, but not in the way I had once feared. The weight of the past was gone, replaced by something new. Hope. Hope for the future, hope for the man I was becoming, and hope for the life that awaited me. As I sat back down at my desk, I realized that for the first time in years, I was exactly where I needed to be. And I was finally free. The future was mine to shape.